Okay, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. My name is Rob McInnes, and I'm going to be moderating this webinar today. Just as a quick introduction about myself, I'm based in the UK, but I work all over the world on various wetland issues. And I've been involved in SWS for about 25 years now, and in that time I've been president of the European chapter and the chair of the Ramsar section. And I really welcome this initiative about webinars that the Society has established, and I really would encourage all of those that are listening today to tell their colleagues about them and to participate in future webinars. So before I actually start, I'd just like to go over a couple of housekeeping items. The general format for today's webinar will be 45 minutes of presentation by our speakers, followed by approximately 15 minutes of questions. At any time during the presentation, if you have questions you'd like to ask, you can type them into your questions box, which you should see on the control pane, and I will pose those questions on your behalf to the presenters at the end. And if you have a specific question to one of the presenters, can you make sure you indicate which one you're addressing the question to? Also, just to let you know, the webinar is being recorded and you will receive a link to the audio following the webinar if you need to listen to it again or want to go back over certain points. And there'll also be an evaluation survey, and we'd like you to take a moment to complete that because that's very helpful for the Society in terms of planning future events. Also, if you'd like copies of the slides from today's presentation, if you look on the control pane, you'll see a handout section and you can access the slides from there. And if you're tech savvy and you're into social media, you can tweet about the webinar using hashtag SWSwebinar. So we're also, as this is an SWS event, we're also, sorry, I just give you an indication in terms of the housekeeping where you have the different panes if you need to access the handouts, the questions, or the audio. And there's a delightful photo of myself. So also, we're proud to announce that this webinar has been approved by SWS Professional Certification Programme, and it's applicable for continuing education credits that can be applied to your PWS certification or renewal. Participation certificates are now available through the automated process. You'll receive an email from Michelle, from the business manager, from SWS business manager, approximately in about a day's time. So check your spam email if you haven't received it, because it might go into your spam box. So just click on the appropriate link to get your certificate. Participation certificates are also available for those who watch the webinar recordings. So if you want to record this and listen to it later, they can be found on the past webinars page. So to move forward, that's the logistics and the housekeeping out the way. What I'd like to do is present our two speakers. They're both originally from the UK, even though one of them is actually at the moment, as we speak, going to be in Winnipeg in the States. So the first speaker is Reverend David Walker. Dave began his career in the water industry as a field service technician back in 1989. He's got qualifications initially in electronics, which he gained a BSc honours from Sheffield Hallam University, and in environmental management. And more recently, he's been awarded a BA honours in theology from the University of Sheffield. Dave has actively worked in the flow service industry for over 30 years and has experience of operating flow surveys, not just in the UK, but in Canada, Hong Kong and Australia. His work has been wide-ranging from permanent flow measurements within Mersey Estuary Pollution Alleviation Programme, which is an estuary on the west coast of England, to short and long-term flow studies in urban and rural drainage areas, and rural catchments and sustainable urban drainage schemes, which in the UK we use the term SUDS. Dave studied at Sheffield Hallam University, where his work focused on sewer flow measurement and instrumentation and practice. Recently gaining a BA in theology at the University of Sheffield and becoming ordained priest in the Church of England, Reverend Dave balances his time as a commercial director and a priest, working with utilities and local communities on the successful management of SUDS, specialising in urban wetland management. Through Dave's missional work with the church, he is pioneering a number of collaborative programs geared to the long-term management of sustainable urban drainage systems. This work is successfully bringing together experts from secular business, national and international utilities, and local community groups. So you can see that Dave has quite a varied and mixed background. He's joined today by Brian Smith, who works for Yorkshire Water Services, one of the water companies in the UK. He has a broad, diverse skill base and technical expertise, with over 40 years experience across engineering disciplines relevant to the water industry. And these have been gained both in public and private sector and strategic roles within Yorkshire Water. A consummate professional committed to providing consistent high standards with an ability to maintain focus and identify issues and risks that are important to the sector. Brian also provides strategic intelligence on matters relating to sewerage, the environment, and strategic planning and development. He has established a clear policy framework for storm and wastewater network strategies, and also Brian has set up innovative intelligence-driven solutions to ensure Yorkshire Water is prepared to overcome future challenges in this area and achieve its vision and strategic objectives. And for those of you that are not familiar with the UK water industry, the water industry is constantly under pressure from government and from the government regulator to improve its environmental performance and its financial performance. So Brian works in a very challenging arena, working for a water company. And in this, he represents the company at a national level on technical, regulatory and legislative issues, and is also the chair of the Water UK Surface Water Management Network. He is the UK representative for British standards on the development of an international standard for stormwater management in urban areas. So with that introduction over, what I would like to do now is pass over to Dave and to Brian and let them get on with the actual presentation and the talk on how to make better constructed wetlands. Over to you, Dave and Brian. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rob, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to this webinar. Just a slight apology there following Rob's introduction of Winnipeg. Winnipeg's in Canada. I'm in an office in Canada. I don't want to get thrown out early on. Okay. As I said, I'm Reverend Dave Walker. I'm also the Commercial Director of Detectronic Limited. And I've been actively involved some time now, working with my co-presenter, who is also, well, he's not here in Winnipeg, he's at the other side of the pond, Brian C. Smith. And we're going to talk to you today about the projects we've been working on over in the UK, the Lea Brook Valley project, which is a small wet pond over in a place, a small town called Dronfield in the UK. The Lea Brook Valley serves a very important biohabitat network throughout the region of Dronfield, not only for the species it houses, but also for the balancing upon the wetland itself and the engineering behind that, preventing flooding of downtown Toronto. Sorry, I'm back here in Canada, aren't I? Downtown Toronto. I'm saying in downtown in Dronfield. So Lea Brook Valley, it was a flood attenuation scheme in the 1970s. Built by what was then the local government on a primary purpose to attenuate flooding and surface water, to prevent flooding for the new housing development. What at the time in the 1970s was the biggest housing development in Europe. Now, interesting, whilst I've been doing my research on this project, it was developed in the 1970s, and praise God for the visionary of those who pioneered the internet at the same time in the 1970s for us to actually be able to do this webinar presentation. I'm here in Canada, and Brian's over in Yorkshire, and Rob's over in Oxfordshire. So it's great to know that two masters of engineering fates were established or being visionarized in the 70s. To this day, 30 odd years on, that we've got a great environment, a great wetland, what's been now maintained, and we'll go into how this is being maintained now, and what we need to do to actually enhance wetlands in the future. Before I do that, and before I go on to the next slide, I want to just put forward some statistics from WWF. They have put a report out that there's 2,000 wetlands covering 470,000 acres, 2,000 wetlands globally. For me, I don't think that's enough. I think we need more wetlands. We need to actually be pioneering, just as they pioneered in the 1970s, that wetlands are have such a great use in not only engineering terms, but also biodiversity. And it's extremely important we actually look at promoting more of that. It's also interesting that Winnipeg was a natural pond many years ago. And since housing and the urban areas have developed, well, that adds to problems of surface water and flooding. So we have to look at how we actually can manage this, because the fact is we can't actually hold back from Mother Nature. Climate change is going to continue. We're going to have increased rainfall. We may not have long periods of rainfall, but very high intense rainfall. So we need to bring all this into consideration when we're looking at wetlands. One of the interesting conversations I had just this morning was about new developments and where they're developing wetlands. And we had this with Lea Brook Valley, and I'll be talking about this shortly, was when you actually develop or start the constructed wetlands, it doesn't look good. It looks very much a mud pile until it starts growing and nature takes hold. But after a year or two, leaving it up to nature with some loving care and attention, then things can actually progress in the way that they should. And also, it's talked about the destruction, the WWF talk about the destruction of wetlands. In the Philippines, coastal wetlands have been destroyed, 80% have been destroyed over the last 30 years. And again, going back to Lea Brook Valley, it was constructed 30 years ago. And I'm sure Brian will agree with me here, is over the years, the early years, there's some great footage of that. Oops, I'm seeing these slides jumping forward. We'll come back in a bit. Lea Brook Valley wetland constructed 30 years ago was constructed 30 years ago, and then all of a sudden we saw it grow and the nature took hold. But eventually, over the 30 years, we got to a point where it also started depreciating, and we lost that love and care and attention. So I'm now going to advance on to the next slide, which, sorry, but technically, there we go. There we go. All right, sorry. So recipe for success. For any wetland, we're going to need rainfall and an army of people. That is the key points of any constructed wetland. If we don't get the rain, we end up with a desert, a dry area, which it doesn't class itself as a wetland. It may house habitats, but not the variation of the habitats what we may have. Secondly, as I mentioned there about the Lea Brook Valley being constructed 30 years ago, if we leave the wetland on its own, no matter how good we are with our design criteria of having a self-maintained wetlands, they can't maintain themselves. Yes, naturally and through biodiversity, they grow, and that's brilliant, but we still have to have an army of people to actually maintain these. And these are the two main these are the two main ingredients for a successful wetland. So I'm first of all going to talk about rainfall and how that actually impacts on our wetlands. So this is from the engineering side of things. It's as we mentioned, it's no good constructing the wetland if we're going to have no surface water input into it. It will just dry up. We need ample rainfall. We need to calculate the dry and wet levels in order to for the conditions of a sustainable drainage system. And this is achieved by understanding rainfall. We've got to actually make sure that we actually understand the rainfall for a number of reasons. One, so we can determine how much surface water and how much volume we're going to have entering the wetland, so we can actually design it and also continue to maintain. But we also need to actually have a variance of accuracy. You see on here on the slide, we've got a 2 kilometre distribution of rainfall. That's not good if you've got localized climate variations. So 0.2 meters is really the rainfall data, what you're going to need to collate in order to be able to present and design the actual wetland itself. That can be done by either putting a number of rain gauges close to the site. Here in the Lea Brook Valley, Norman Croson, one of the founder members of Lea Brook Valley, bless him, he's doing another presentation as we do this presentation in the UK. He has a rain gauge on his house, and that data is fed back into the models so we can actually collate all that information together. Having access to radar rainfall is also important, and then the tools to bring this together. We've used a package on the Lea Brook Valley data current, and that's been extremely good to actually bring in all that data and actually collate it so we can see exactly how much rainfall we've got coming in over the year. And for instance, in 2018, we had 1,064 millimetres of rain in the UK. Here in Winnipeg in 2018, Canada States, 354 millimetres. So we have to be, we have to understand how much rainfall we're going to get to feed our wetlands. So that was the first important task, what we was faced with. And then it's actually, where does all that surface water go? Is it going into the wetlands, or is it going into our sewer networks and foul sewer networks, collection systems? We need that surface water to be coming into the sustainable drainage system, into the wetland. If it doesn't, then it's going elsewhere, and we potentially see flooding on a national basis. Here, once we've collected rainfall and flow information from the site surrounding the wetland, we've been able to identify infiltration and inflow. The reason why all this data is so important is when we sit down with the stakeholders, the water companies, the lead local flood authorities, the environment agencies, the regulators, to talk about how we go forward and manage a wetland, we need all this information. We need facts. And without the facts, we don't get buy-in. So it's extremely important that we do the monitoring first in order to actually prove the business case going forward. Okay, so this data here shows us that we've got total I&I volume of 1,859 meters cubed. That's I&I actually going into the foul system, the sanitary sewer. Well, that's too much. The actual dry weather flow is 327 cubic meters in the foul system. We've got more surface water going into the foul sewer, into the sanitary system, than we've got going into my wetland. And that's not good. And that's what we have to sit down with the stakeholders, with the drainage companies, to actually say, I don't want that surface water going into your network. I want it going into my wetland. Ironically, they don't want it going into their foul system either. Why would they want to actually be treating clean water? So again, it's very important that we actually gain and get up-to-date, accurate information. There. And this is the aerial view of the foul and surface water sewer network of our site at the Lea Brook Valley. That's actually showing where all the monitoring stations are. So that's where we're actually picking up flow from the surface water or the foul network. And if I click up there. The green triangle there is the actual location of the wetland. So you can see how important it is to actually do background monitoring of the actual surface water and foul systems, because we need all that surface water going into the wetland for it to actually survive. If we don't get that surface water channeled into the wetland, it's going to dry up. And that's what happened over the 30 years. When the wetland was first constructed, as I said, in the early 70s, there's some photographic evidence showing how beautiful the site was. Just over 3 years ago, we've got photographic evidence showing it was like a swamp. And in fact, the local community had actually started calling it a swamp because it was drying out, it was sludgy, it wasn't very good. So, oops, seem to have, there we go. So this slide showing the surface water inputs to the actual wetland itself. The top left-hand corner, that is the actual Lea Brook itself. So that is the actual natural brook what's ran through that site well before any of that housing development was created. A concern there, since we've been doing the monitoring on that brook, is the actual flows are extremely low. Even in severe rainfall events, the flows are quite low. And that actually is identifying that there's upstream blockage within that culvert. So that's a project we've got to start investigating a bit further, because that surface water is actually causing flooding potentially upstream in the urban area. We want to remove that flooding and we want to get the surface waters back into the wetland. The top right-hand corner here is a continuation pipe of 9-inch, 225 millimeter diameter, and that's actually feeding an industrial estate from the north of the site, and that's bringing all that surface water in. We do have to be careful from industrial discharges because we get pollution. We get fat soils and greases from some of the industrial sites. We get carbon deposits coming in from road surface runoff. But if they're managed correctly within the wetland, we can actually use the wetland to actually filter and treat those pollutants. And so everybody's on a win-win. The industrial discharges are on a win. We're on a win because we're getting the water. We're treating the pollution, and actually the site's growing. So it's very important to actually be bringing all this information together. So that was all about monitoring, and I can't reiterate any more than actually we need to have hard evidence of where the volume of surface water is going or coming into the wetland. Once we've got the wetland developed, again, as I reiterate again and go back to the 30 years of the Lea Brook Valley and the wetland at Gosforth Valley there, over the last 3 years, it had just been left. And the reason it's been left is they don't tend to be kept into budgets. We build them, but we don't actually put them into the ongoing budgets. We don't have a 25-year budget yet for the Lea Brook Valley. I emphasize yet because we must and we will end up with a budget for the next 25 years. And that is to actually bring in an army of people and the consultants to actually look and maintain and be custodians of the actual wetland itself. Here, what I'm showing in the top right there is the Nature Fest, what we ran just over 2 years ago. We've since ran it again earlier this year. Very successful. And what Nature Fest did, it actually showed the people, the residents, the community of Dronfield, what natural beauty they got on their doorstep. And I just want to bring this guy right here on the right, the guy there. I hope you can see my cursor. If you can't see my cursor, it's the guy right on the right with the hat on there. That's Norman Crowson. He was the original founder of the Lea Brook Valley, and it was through his determination and guts and getting a lot of challenges from many organisations. He kept on going, and he brought this community of this army of people together, serving as a community and bringing everybody together, working together for the better good of that site. When I first started on the project 2 years ago, it was asked, how are we going to revigorate it? How are we going to rejuvenate the wetland and get everybody working together? Well, we started with a Thanksgiving service. We brought everybody together in the local churches, the local faith groups, and the wider community. And we said, right, we've got this project. It is a challenge. We need to help regenerate the wetland. And we've got all this engineering evidence, all the facts. And that's where we actually brought in the stakeholders like Yorkshire Water, who are now the owners of the land, they're the owners of the wetland, and they brought it together. And from that, bringing that community strongly through Thanksgiving, we were all there bringing forward. As you can see here, the community engagement days, we do workshops, collating all that information. It's important. It's a challenge, and I'll be telling you now is don't build a wetland if you don't get the people, because it's not going to survive. It's important to make sure that you've got the backing of the local community groups, whether it's faith organisations, local churches, scouting groups, the schools. Get everybody involved. Here on this community day, I need to actually just bring this forward, is there was 2 women that actually lived in the same neighbourhood. They'd never actually spoken to each other, but yet they were neighbours. This day, on the workshop day, they actually met each other and became friends. So they may have been strangers, but these wetlands bring people together, and that's the importance. Yeah. And yes, it's also important to keep everybody on track. We must have a plan and a strategy. This might be quite difficult to see. It's quite a small print here, but it actually shows us the timelines. It was a 2-year project. We started with surveying and design. We brought the experts in with all that data we talked about. We had to get all that data to do the initial designs, to get the buy-in from all the stakeholders. We then trained the local volunteers. We got the construction and landscapers coming in, and then we started launching the event. That was the four stages of the project over 2 years, I must say. Excavation of the deeper ponds and removing silt deposits, lining the base of the ponds, removing reed mace was a very important thing. Removing some of the trees, what had actually outgrown, they were actually taking too much of the surface water. So it was a task to actually get all the skill sets, all the people with the right knowledge, with the community groups working together. But I'm pleased to say that we got the local community engaged at every stage, out there chopping trees, pruning the vegetation, building dry hedges, for segregation, and actually maintaining the habitats and introducing new habitats as well. So that was extremely important. It's getting community involved is, like I say, it's not easy. It can be challenging. The faith groups work brilliant on this, which you would expect. They're obviously really into the creation story and very much custodians of going forward. So that's one of the key things what we need to have there. And finally, I'm now coming to my final slide before I'm going to be handing over to Brian in the UK. Tracking success. Once we've put all this together, how has the site improved? The new habitats have been introduced to the area. They came. We did. We didn't physically go and fetch these new species. They actually came once we'd actually made the houses. And when I talk about houses, I mean habitats. Is the species actually came. We've got people out there now actually not monitoring, and when I say monitoring, actually going out and taking detailed records of the birds, the wildlife, all the species there. Number two, the Community 10,000 project is in the UK, Europe. There's a lot of blue chip companies have to give back to the environment, to the communities. They give work days back, and that's 10,000 hours a day. 10,000 hours they have to give over the year. So we've got community engagement programs with some of the government bodies. Number three. What are the long-term goals? Well, the site was described as a swamp, and it's now been regenerated into a nature reserve. The net present value is increasing, and the future present value we need to continue to record. And as we do this, it's about bringing the community together even further. And finally, number four, interaction of local colleges, high schools. There's a local school in the valley now using it for their outdoor educational services for their biology curriculum. So that's great. So what I'm saying, and I'll start ending here because I've gone on far too long, is you've got to get the data. You've got to monitor the rainfall. You've got to monitor your surface inflows into the catchment area. Without that, you haven't got enough facts or hard evidence to go and start working with your stakeholders. Don't build a wetland and think it's going to last for 30 years because it isn't. Not without having an army of people and continuous support. That's the final important part of my part of the presentation. So, got to have the rainfall, got to have the army of people. Now, I'm going to bow out now because I'm going dry. I need to have a quick glass of water, and I'm going to pass you over to Brian Smith, who's actually over the other side of the pond in Yorkshire Water. Thank you very much.
Firstly, I'd like to thank Tony, Michelle and Kim for providing Dave and I the opportunity to present at this event. I'd like to talk about operating in a regulated company and the challenges it brings. On the map, this is where Yorkshire sits within the United Kingdom, highlighted in red. And to add some context, Yorkshire Water is a heavily regulated, privately owned monopoly. We have three regulators. We have an economic regulator, Ofwat, an environmental regulator, the Environment Agency, similar to the US EPA, and a drinking water quality regulator, the Drinking Water Inspectorate. But Yorkshire Water is an anchor organisation. We have an impact on 5 million people every day in their daily lives, and that gives us responsibilities in the communities we serve. We provide some of life's most essential services to the people and businesses of Yorkshire and Humberside region, and playing a key role in the region's health, well-being and prosperity. I'd just like to look at things from a global perspective and just touch on sustainable development goals. As you will know, in 2015, the United Nations members adopted a set of goals to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure prosperity for all as part of new sustainable development agenda. The United States of America is a charter member of the United Nations, and in fact is the host of the headquarters of the UN. Canada has been a member of the United Nations since it was established. However, for the goals to be reached, everyone needs to do their part: governments, private sector, civil society, and people like you and me. And water is the common thread, and wetlands have a very important part to play in delivering some of these goals. The quotation on the slide is from the past presidents of the Institution of Civil Engineers, and is, I feel, quite pertinent to the challenges we're facing. I take cities to mean places and spaces, and our North American counterparts are, of course, the American Society of Civil Engineers and the Canadian Society for Civil Engineering. The wetland itself is owned and managed by Yorkshire Water with the support of Dronfield Town Council and the Lea Brook Valley Volunteers, as David mentioned. It was innovatively created as a means to control stormwater. Its main purpose is to help the town of Dronfield from flooding. However, it's a sobering picture that scientific estimates show that 64% of the world's wetlands have disappeared since 1900. Inland wetlands are disappearing at a faster pace than coastal ones, but the overall trend is clear. In his leaving speech today, Michael Gove, the UK Secretary of State for the Environment, stated that the United Kingdom is now amongst the most nature-depleted nations in the world, and that we need to make more space for nature. So what is driving this loss? Unfortunately, wetlands are often viewed as wasteland, something to be drained, filled, and converted to other purposes. Yorkshire Water has a different view. We need business or greater business agility, or driving sustainability, or need to live with water, and a new social contract will drive us into this space where we are the anchor company leading and supporting the creation of a water-sensitive plan for Yorkshire. Our work, therefore, with the Lea Brook Valley can bring the community together, and our vision and objectives are enough to inspire others to act in the right direction. And perhaps one thing that Dave didn't mention was that Rowan Williamson, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, during a speech to the UN, referred to Gosforth Valley as an exemplar site. On biodiversity, we work with North East Derbyshire Wildlife Trust and the community volunteers to plant 1,000 trees. And our work in this site has now been recognised as national best practice case study for biodiversity. The work that we've undertaken is now enhancing the beauty, the amenities and the wildlife habitat of the Lea Brook Valley, and improvements for the wildlife and for the benefit of the people in Dronfield, as well as those who have an interest in conservation and biodiversity in the valley. And local volunteers undertake the ongoing management of the site, which is very supportive and helpful to Yorkshire Water. In terms of accomplishments, the volunteers on the site have over the years ensured that the land is free from rubbish and it is well maintained. They undertake weekly rotas for litter picking and general maintenance. We have provided information boards for residents in the community, and this all supports the community, educational and environmental enhancement of the site. Now, I'd just like to start by talking about the concept of sustainable accounting. This is not new, but it's a growing field, and it's an umbrella term for considering the environment, society, individuals, and knowledge and business decision-making and reporting. It's something that's been around as a concept for at least a few decades, but over the past few years, there has been a real proliferation of approaches and frameworks, and a growing number of organisations are starting to apply the concept. At Yorkshire Water, we use something called the 6 Capitals framework to help determine and quantify their impacts and dependencies. So this uses a similar format to management and financial accounting to show these impacts on the balance sheet, where previously they would not have been considered. So what are referred to as externalities in traditional economics. So what's the point of doing this? I think it's summed up very well in the quote from His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, who is a strong proponent of sustainable accounting. If the planet was a bank, it would be considered to be in serious need of bailout as a result of mismanagement. As a species, we've been plundering our reserves of natural capital and failing to replenish them. So sustainable accounting is a way of making this visible and giving the indicators of environmental and social impacts a common language and common units with our financial accounting to help us make better and more ethical decisions. So this is a way of ensuring that we're properly accounting for the resources that organisations and we as individuals are completely dependent on for a continued existence. And actually, when used to its full potential, it can point us towards ways to make that existence better. So by shining a spotlight on the resources and services we're depending on and providing, it can help us identify new markets as a water company and new products and new improved ways of working. At Yorkshire Water, we've adopted the 6 capitals concept referred to previously, and that has been referred to by the International Integrated Reporting Council. We've been developing and expanding our application of the concept for a number of years. Now, the definition of capital here is a bit broader than the one used in classical economics. Essentially, it refers to a stock of physical or non-physical resources which yield flows of benefits upon which organisations depend and upon which they can have a variety of impacts. Impacts that we were able to put a monetary value to. Now, this is now being used to inform our land strategy and assets such as the Gosforth Valley Wetland. So I think to conclude, the management and maintenance of this site requires skill sets not traditionally employed by sewerage undertakers or water companies within the UK. So skills such as horticulture, landscape and vegetation management. And the success of this joint venture is really about the aspirations and the vision of individuals. And this would not have been possible in isolation, and it does demonstrate the need for and the benefits from people, communities, and partnerships. And I think really my take-home message is that nature is a gift that keeps on giving. And given the challenges we are facing, I feel it is incumbent on us professionally and morally to facilitate a reverse in the declining loss of the world's wetlands. So I think the work that Yorkshire Water are doing in partnership with Dave, with the Lea Brook Valley, moves us forward a great deal to achieving our collective aspirations and visions. We have developed partnerships and we are continuing to develop that trust. We understand some of the constraints of the stakeholders in the respective organisations, and we understand the needs of the communities and the environment. So I'd now like to say thank you very much, everyone, for the opportunity to present and for listening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave, and thank you very much, Brian, for a very interesting talk. We have a few moments. We have maybe 10-15 minutes for questions. We have a few that have come through via the question pane, but I would just like to kick off the questions and use the role of the moderator just to get things going. I was very interested that this was a project that was developing in the 1970s when traditionally, especially in the United Kingdom, solutions were very much around built infrastructure, pipes and boxes rather than wetlands. And so I'd really like to ask the question of Brian, if possible, if you can explain why back in the 1970s, which is before Yorkshire Water would have been privatised when it was still a government utility, why was a wetland solution even considered? Because it's quite innovative for the 1970s.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, I think that's a very good question indeed. Traditionally, infrastructure in the 1970s for dealing with stormwater was through pipes and culverts or conduits. Green infrastructure in wetlands was not really a considered option at that time. However, I do feel that even at that time, I think, well, we're now at a critical juncture, but I think that as well as our statutory duties and our regulatory obligations, the challenges of climate change and development growth, even then, necessitated a change in approach. You know, and I think we recognized even back then that continuing solely with the traditional approach of maintaining and enhancing our wastewater network through traditional infrastructure was not sustainable. And we tried to develop an innovative solution. And we thought that to overcome some of the challenges, even back in the 70s, to be effectively managed, we needed to start to look at using, I suppose, the optimal combination of above and below ground infrastructure. Now that has further developed, and I think our long-term plan now for wastewater networks will drive this adaptation of our activities to the impacts of climate change and development growth. Now this in itself generates an opportunity to not only tackle some of the long-standing issues such as sewer flooding and maintaining environmental protection, but I think it enables us to give something back to society in the form of amenity, habitat provision, and enhanced biodiversity. So I think, again, it was quite innovative thinking in its day, and by positioning ourselves as environmental stewards, we will be better placed to influence public policy and take on more responsibility in this area in the future. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much, Brian. We had a specific question from one of the people listening in on slide 14, which I'm going to try and flip back to, which was basically that there's an insert map, which I'm looking for. So just please bear with me as I'm flipping back to slide 14, which I think was one of the ones that Dave put up. Was it that way? I think that was it that one? I can't actually see the slide numbering. But the question was that there's an indication of a linear buffer along the stream or the ditch. And sorry, I'm just trying to move the slide forward. I'm just wondering whether we know which one we're on. I think that's slide 14. So there was a question which was saying that there's a linear buffer along the stream or the ditch, and the question was, as part of the enhancement project, has it considered establishment of more linear buffers along the inflows or the outfalls and the conveyances? So are there wider sort of consideration given to buffers along the stream and along the inflows and outfalls? And I think I can target either one of Brian or Dave to answer that.
I don't know if you want to start off, Dave, given the enhancement works that you've just currently been completing.
Do we know what the term linear buffers, what we're meaning on linear buffers? When we talk about the river stream. Sorry.
I'm assuming these will be buffers which will provide some sort of protection from either runoff or as a buffer for habitat for wildlife along the linear.
Okay. Well, I'll approach it on both concepts then, because that's why I asked the question: is it the linear buffer from the surface water runoff, flooding, etc., or is it the habitat, or both? So
yeah, it's the habitat. It's the sort of vegetated side of the buffer.
Yeah, so if it's habitat on the vegetated side of the buffer, then the natural stream has not been changed. So that was considered right at the design stages. And in fact, nothing actually got changed over these past 2 years. All that we did, and it was very clear in the design, was to actually bring it back to its natural habitat. And how it was when it was first constructed. That actually brought in making sure that we did get the surface water runoff from the urban area, the surface water from the road networks there, but also that the stream, the Lea Brook Valley itself, actually comes through and meanders and actually is not disrupted in any way or format. One of the criteria from Yorkshire Water as landowners of the site was we couldn't reduce or implement a change on the actual volume, the current volume of the site. So that was also important. But we had ecologists and many experts from quite a wide range of fields, helping us design with habitats and species in place. And the overall site now produces habitats for at least 4 varying species: a dry land, a wetland, a boggy area, and the actual natural wetland itself. So we've got 4 varying habitats. I hope that gives a bit of feedback to that question.
That's great. Thank you very much, Dave. And whilst I've got you on, we have another question which was relating to the monitoring and the calculation of flows. The question relates to groundwater input. Was there any groundwater input that needed consideration in the initial sort of design and data collection for the wetland? Or
no,
was it all
not necessarily. It's also, we've got 7 boreholes on the site. So we did borehole sampling. Interesting, the groundwater levels were quite low at that site. But then again, I'm saying it's interesting. It's probably right in the fact that it's quite elevated, that part of Dronfield. So the actual groundwater levels are reasonably low, so we're not getting much in from the groundwater. The main pond, what was originally constructed in the 1970s, does have probably, it's about 300 mil a foot of groundwater maintained continuously. The rest is actually surface water input. That's why it's been extremely important doing that monitoring on the surrounding catchment, identifying where all that surface water is coming and where it's going. And as I'm sure Brian will agree with me, is the water company does not want surface water entering its foul catchment. It does not want it entering its foul network or its sanitary sewer.
Okay. Thanks. Another question from one of the attendees is in relation to the topography of the catchment, just trying to understand where the wetland lies compared to the surrounding urban development. So,
that's a very good question. Yeah.
And does the water naturally migrate towards the wetland, or does it rely on the built infrastructure to get it to the wetland?
Okay, yes, now that's a very good question, because when building these wetlands, we need to have that taken into consideration. And I don't know if it was yourself, Rob, or Brian, who said, the engineering, what went into this wetland in the 1970s is unbelievable. It was designed with that in mind. We've got the natural watercourse of the Lea Brook Valley. It's actually at the higher level of Dronfield Town itself. And so it naturally collects all the surface water from the actual surrounding site, from the surrounding urban area. But without this, Dronfield Town itself is much lower in topography and would suffer continuously from flooding if this wetland was not actually in place. So we've got to commend the engineers who developed this site in the 1970s.
That's excellent. Okay, I've got one last question before we sort of wrap up, because we're coming up to the end. Given that this wetland's probably got about 30 to 40 years of life already under its belt, where do you see this going over the next 20 or 30 years? And from a personal perspective, what are your aspirations and hope for this wetland? If I can ask that to both presenters, please.
Okay, I'll start with that. I think over the last 20 or 30 years, as a water company, we have learned an awful lot about the wetland, about the operation, management and maintenance of this type of asset and the benefits that it can bring, the wider societal benefits and community benefits. So whilst primarily it was designed as a flood protection asset to protect the town from flooding, I think now that we've got a better understanding of it and we can see that there is an approach where we can use the optimal combination of above and below ground infrastructure, we would now see this as influencing changes in policy and our approach to use more green infrastructure and work in partnerships to create more wetlands and more habitat and more amenity. So I think it's a really exciting juncture. And I think we can work together collectively with stakeholders to create more of these types of assets.
Absolutely. And if I can add to Brian's comments there, is from the Lea Brook Valley team and the community of Dronfield, we hear the term retention basins, surface water retention, etc., etc. We need to retain people. It's all about that army of people I spoke of earlier. We've got to make these wetlands interesting, engaging, places where people want to come and help out. Like I said, with the community projects, there's another project what we're working with the local health authority within Sheffield and Dronfield, and it's for mental health, mental well-being. There's been proven studies for people to be out in nature and the environment, and now actually that actually helps with anxiety and so on for mental health. So going forward, from my point of view, it's actually really helping and making sure we maintain community spirit. And I'd also like to leave with something what we always keep putting forward in the Lea Brook Valley, and it's piece from the Bible, Matthew 19:26. Humanly speaking, it is impossible, but with God, everything is. And I have to say that as a faith priest, but it's not easy. But with everybody working together, we can do this.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave. Thank you very much, Brian. I think we shall conclude there, but I totally agree and I echo those thoughts. I think part of the reason those rather horrific statistics on wetland loss keep on being rolled out is that we, as a society, we've lost our connection and our sense of value to do with wetlands. And I think part of this is getting people to actually value wetlands in a far better way and appreciate them more consistently across the planet, not just in places like the United States and the UK. So thank you very much to our speakers. What I'd just like to finish up on is just to say, get a date for your diary. On August the 22nd, SWS has its next webinar, which is going to be given by Eric Marsoff from the St John's River Water Management District, and he's going to be talking about the restoration of Lake Apopka and the surrounding wetlands. So please put that date in your diary. I'm sure that will be an excellent webinar. And final thank you again to Dave and Brian, and thank you to everyone who has found time in their very busy schedules to join us today on the webinar. And wherever you are in the world, I hope you have a good morning, evening, day, whatever it is. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.